Have you ever known a love so deep that time itself could not diminish it? The kind that endures beyond distance, beyond years. One you could never truly name, though you carry it with you always. In the earlier days, before war's dread horn had sounded across our realm, I first beheld you in the forest, beyond the kingdom's eastern marches. I rode forth that dawn, bearing bow and quiver, naming myself a hunter of the white heart that dwelt in those ancient groves. But truth, which cuts deeper in these latter days of shadow, speaks plainer. I was no hunter, but a fugitive. I fled the suffocating weight of ceremony, the endless councils where old men spoke of my destiny as though it were already written in stone. They spoke of the crown I would wear, the treaties I would sign, the bride I would take, all arranged, all decided, all mapped like roads I had no choice but to travel. I was 23 that summer, and I had never made a single choice that was truly my own. The forest called to me, as it had since boyhood, those vast green halls where no counselor could follow, where I was unburdened by expectation. I rode deep into the ancient groves, where oak and ash grew thick enough to dim the sun, where the air itself seemed to shimmer with a quiet older than kingdoms. Then, in a glade where silver birches stood sentinel, like pale witnesses to something sacred, I heard water singing over smooth stones. I dismounted, drawn by that sound, and pushed through a curtain of willow branches that swept the ground like green waterfalls. And there, kneeling beside the stream, I saw you. You were only a figure in shadow and dappled light, a woman in simple homespun, her dark hair unbound and falling like a river of night down her back. You cupped the crystal water in your hands, drinking deep, and when you lifted your face to the light filtering through the canopy, the sun caught you in a shaft of gold that seemed placed by divine intention. I stood frozen, one hand still holding the willow branches aside, not struck by love, not yet, but struck by something I had no name for, a recognition, perhaps, as though I had been searching for something I didn't know was lost, and suddenly, impossibly, here it was. You must have sensed my presence, for you turned. Our eyes met across perhaps 20 paces of forest floor, carpeted in moss and last year's leaves. Your eyes held no fear. You were a calm, measuring intelligence that made me feel suddenly conscious of myself in a way I never had before. Not as a prince, not as a future king, but as a man being truly seen for the first time. "You're trespassing," you said, and there was the ghost of amusement in your voice. The absurdity of it struck me. I, who would one day rule these lands, accused of trespassing. I should have been offended. Instead, I found myself smiling. You stood, and I saw you were taller than I'd first thought, your posture carrying a natural grace, You looked at me then, truly looked, and I saw you taking in my face, my bearing, the quality of my hunting leathers. I saw the moment you recognize what I must be, if not who precisely. You're from the court, you said. Not a question. I could have denied it. Some instinct told me I should. But those eyes, dark and direct, demanded honesty. Yes. You nodded slowly, something shuddering behind your expression. You began to walk away. I called out. Wait. I asked for your name. You paused, glancing back over your shoulder. For a long moment you said nothing, and I thought you might simply walk away, leaving me with nothing but questions and the ghost of your presence. Then, so quietly I almost didn't hear, Serene. And you were gone, disappearing into the forest like morning mist beneath the sun. I sat there in the moss and leaves, my heart beating strangely fast, and I thought, Serene, a word the world itself must have whispered into being just for her. I did not know then that this was the beginning. I only knew that I would return to this forest, tomorrow, and the day after, and every day, until I saw you again. 3 days passed before I returned. 3 days in which I told myself to forget, to focus on my duties. But I thought of nothing but dark eyes, in my dreams, in my waking thoughts. You awoke something in me. I found the glade again as though pulled by invisible thread. This time I came on foot, having left my horse at the forest's edge. You were there, sitting on a stone beside the stream, a book open in your lap. You looked up as I approached, and if you were surprised to see me, you didn't show it. I should have left. Instead, I found myself kneeling by your side, asking what you were reading. You held up the book so I could see the worn cover. The Meditations of King Aldrich the Wise. I had studied it, of course, required learning for princes. But I lied, claiming ignorance, wanting only to hear your voice. And so you read to me, your voice like water over stones, while I sat on the moss nearby and listened. Not to the words, really, though they were fine words, but to the cadence of your voice, the passion that crept in when you reached passages that moved you. When you finished the chapter, you looked at me with a small smile, knowing full well I had deceived you. Something shifted in your expression, not quite softness, but a crack in whatever wall you had erected. Will you return? You asked. If you wish. So I returned the next day, and the day after, and so began the sweetest torture I have ever known. Day after day I returned. We rode together across fields of golden wheat that rolled like ocean swells beneath endless sky. Your laughter carried on the wind, a sound more precious to me than any ode sang in marble halls. I taught you the sword in hidden clearings, not because you had need of such arts, but because I had desperate need to remain in your presence, to guide your hand with mine, to exist in those suspended moments when duty seemed a distant, forgettable dream. You showed me books I had never troubled to open, philosophies of the ancient sage kings, poetry that made language dance like flame. Once, your finger traced words on yellowed parchment, firelight painting amber across your face, and you read aloud, "Power without wisdom is but destruction wearing a crown." Would that I had carved those words into my very bones. Those stolen hours became my sanctuary, a secret garden walled against the thorned world. In your company, I shed the heavy mantle of what I was meant to become. I was not the future king, burdened by bloodline and prophecy. I was simply a man who laughed at your wit, who listened as you spoke of stars and stories, who felt the unbearable lightness of being known, truly known, by another soul. But summer, like all beautiful things, cannot last forever, and the world beyond our forest was already sharpening its knives. War came not as distant thunder, but as lightning striking the very heart of summer. The northern holds rebelled, their banners turning red with the blood of tax collectors and kings' men. Border kingdoms, sensing weakness as wolves scent wounded prey, fell upon our marches with fire and steel. What began as a skirmish in some nameless valley erupted into a conflagration that threatened to consume all we had built across generations uncounted. 3 kings we were to be, myself and 2 brothers not of blood, but forged in the same fires of preparation, bound by oath and training to stand as bulwark against the tide. The plan was always thus. I would lead in war, while they secured the realm through politics and alliance. Together we would unite the fractured kingdoms under one banner, one crown, mine. But even then, even before war's clarifying fire, I sensed the hairline cracks forming in our unity. The summons came on parchment sealed in black wax. The war demanded my presence, my sword, my command. I was to ride forth and break the rebellion, to secure the borders, to prove myself worthy of the throne that awaited. There was something else I had to do before I left. Someone I needed to see one final time. I remember that final evening as though it were graven in crystal, every detail sharp enough to draw blood. We stood in the palace garden, where white roses bloomed like fallen stars, their perfume heavy on the summer air. Above us the sky stretched vast and dark, the stars burning with a brightness that seemed almost cruel in its beauty. You wore a gown the colour of twilight, and in your eyes I saw reflected all the light those stars could give. You had been summoned to court. My brothers, under the guidance of the royal council, had selected you for queenship. Your family, minor nobility with ties to the disputed eastern territories, made you the perfect bridge between factions. Through your marriage, the realm would be unified. What they did not know, what no one knew save you and I, was that we had already chosen each other in our hearts, long before any counselor drew up plans for political union. The war was nothing like the bright tales of glory told in feast halls by old men whose scars had faded to white lines and comfortable memory. It was mud, churned red with blood, and the copper taste of death when you breathed. It was the screams of boys barely old enough to grow beards, dying in fields far from home, crying for mothers who would never know where their bones lay scattered. It was the weight of every decision, knowing that your command would purchase victory with the coin of other men's lives. I learned that I was skilled at war. I won battles where wiser men would have withdrawn. I took cities that should have held against us. I drove the enemy back, league by bloody league, and with each victory, the cheers grew louder, and something inside me grew quieter, until I felt hollowed out like a tree struck by lightning. Still standing, still seemingly whole, but burned black and empty within. Months bled into seasons. The war ground on. You could end this, I thought. No more blood spilled on your account. Power waits in the deep places. Old power. Power that would make you unstoppable. Take it. End the war, I thought. Weakness and shame consumed me for thinking so cowardly. I resisted and thought of you, of the garden where white roses bloomed, of the man I wished to be when I returned to claim your hand. But war is a slow poison. It seeps into the blood, corrupts the marrow, transforms you by degrees so gradual you do not notice until the change is complete and irreversible. Letters from home grew sparse, then stopped entirely. The few that reached me spoke in careful language of securing alliances and necessary arrangements. My brothers wrote of holding the realm together, of making difficult decisions in my absence. Never once did they mention you. I told myself it meant nothing, that all would be made right when I returned victorious. But deep in my bones, in the place where truth lives beyond the reach of comfortable lies, I knew something was wrong. And the whispers that had begun on the battlefield spoke not just of power, but of loss, of betrayal, of futures stolen while I was too far away to defend them. The breaking came on a night of red moon, on a battlefield so thick with the dead that you could not walk without treading upon corpses. We had won. The enemy was routed. But the cost, gods, the cost. Something had been taken from me in that moment. I could feel it. Something I would spend the rest of my cursed existence trying to name. The next day, the war ended. I broke the enemy's final army with a power that made seasoned warriors flee screaming. The enemy sued for peace before nightfall. We rode home in triumph. The people lined the roads, cheering, throwing flowers, blessing my name. And all I could think was, I am coming, Serene. Hold fast. I am coming. But I was already too late. I reached the capital on the 7th day of my return journey. I had ridden ahead of my army, desperate, driving my horse near to death, the dark power lending me strength to ride day and night without rest. The city was adorned for celebration. Banners hung from every window, flowers carpeted the streets, and the bells, gods, the bells were ringing. Wedding bells. I arrived at the great cathedral as the sun climbed toward noon. The doors stood open, and from within came the sound of sacred hymns. The murmur of hundreds of voices joined in witness. I dismounted in the shadow of the cathedral steps. My armor was still caked with the mud and blood of the last battlefield. I must have looked like a revenant. Something crawled from a grave. No one stopped me as I entered. Perhaps they did not recognize me. Perhaps they were too caught up in the ceremony to notice. Perhaps, seeing my face, they were afraid. I drew my cloak's hood low and moved through the crowd like a shadow, finding a place in the darkness at the back of the great hall. And there, at the altar bathed in light from the stained glass windows, I saw you. You wore white, a gown of silk and lace that caught the colored light and made you seem a figure from a dream, untouchable, unreal. Your dark hair was crowned with flowers, white roses like the ones that bloomed in the garden where we had said goodbye. And beside you stood my brother, not my brother in arms, but my brother in blood, the one I had trusted to hold the realm in my absence. He wore the crown, and on your finger he had placed a ring. I had crossed oceans of blood and fire, fought wars to reach the end of that isle, to find you waiting. And instead, I found this, a white draped betrayal, exquisite and absolute. The cold kissed my skin, indifferent, yet I felt its embrace more intimately than any warmth. The air carried the metallic scent of my own fury, of the world I had bled for, and I understood. Love, desire, loyalty, all could be stolen, could all turn to ash in a single moment. Bodies might rise and fall in battles. Kingdoms might crumble beneath a single strike. But nothing could undo this final, exquisite wound. Every heartbeat was a dirge, every breath a frost of despair. You, made ethereal by light and flowers, him, crowned in my absence, and I, standing at the edge of a world that had died. The blood of my devotion turned to winter in my veins. This was betrayal incarnate. This was death. And I would remember it until the last pulse of my heart. The priest's voice echoed through the vaulted space, speaking words I had once imagined hearing in different circumstances. Words about love and loyalty, about sacred bonds and unbreakable vows. I stood in the shadows and watched as the man I had called brother took your hand in his. I saw your face then, truly saw it. You were not smiling. Your eyes were distant, hollow. The eyes of someone performing a duty she has accepted but not chosen. You looked like a woman carved from marble, beautiful and cold, and utterly removed from the moment happening around you. If any person can show just cause why they may not be joined together, the priest intoned, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The silence stretched, heavy, expectant. I could have spoken. The dark power coursing through my veins whispered that I could stop this, that I could stride down that aisle, cast aside the pretender king, claim what was mine by right and by love. But as I stood there in the darkness, I realized something that broke me more completely than any battlefield ever had. You knew I was there, even from that distance, even with your back turned. Somehow you knew. I saw it in the stiffening of your shoulders, the slight turn of your head as though you might look back. I turned and walked back down the aisle, my footsteps echoing like thunder in the sacred silence. Every candle in the cathedral guttered and died, plunging the space into darkness. Night had fallen quickly. I pulled my hood lower and stepped out into the night. Behind me, the great doors slammed shut with a sound like the closing of a tomb. And with that sound, the last remnant of the man I had been died. The voice in my head, which had been my companion through the long years of war, grew stronger still. It spoke not of power now, but of vengeance, of justice, of making the world understand the depth of what had been taken from me. They betrayed you, your brothers, the council. They chose politics over love, convenience over truth. Make them pay. Make them all pay. And forgive me. I listened. I do not know what comes next. The armies of the free peoples gather against me. Perhaps they will succeed where so many have failed. Perhaps I will fall, and the darkness will end with me. But please know this. In another world, in another life, I would have returned from war and stood at that altar beside you, not as a shadow haunting the darkness, but as the man I promised to be. We would have had our green days without end, our children, our kingdom built on love rather than lies. That man would have been worthy of you. This one can only offer you words and regret, and a love that has become the very instrument of his damnation. The transformation did not happen all at once. It was gradual, like a man slowly freezing to death, losing sensation bit by bit, until he cannot remember what warmth felt like. I gathered those who had been cast aside by the new order, men who had fought beside me in the war and returned to find their lands given to others, their honors stripped away, their sacrifices forgotten. I offered them the same dark bargain I had accepted, power in exchange for what remained of their humanity. And so the Shadow King's army was born, not from ambition, not from hunger for conquest or dreams of empire, but for love, for betrayal. I told myself I would bring justice, that I would tear down the corrupt order that had stolen our future. But with each city I burned, with each army I scattered to the wind, with each victory won through dark power and darker purpose, I drifted further from the man that I was. I became the very thing those ancient books had warned against. You will have heard the stories by now, I imagine. The Shadow King who brought darkness upon the realm, the tyrant who showed no mercy, who laid waste to all who opposed him, who became a creature of nightmare and legend. They are not wrong, these stories. I have done everything they say, and worse. I have earned every curse they throw at my name. But I wanted you to know, in whatever way this might reach you across the gulf of what I have become, that I loved you once, and that I would have saved you if I thought you wanted to be saved. If I could have allowed myself to get close to you, if I could have refrained from darkness long enough to reach you, I would have. That is not an excuse. There can be no excuse for what I have done. The innocents who died screaming in the fires I commanded, the children orphaned by my wars, the world I have broken in my rage and grief. But it is the truth. I loved you. I love you still, though that love has curdled into something monstrous, though it has poisoned everything it touches, though it has transformed me into this shadow. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not deserve it. I am beyond such grace now, beyond such hope. But I needed you to know that the man you loved in that forest glade all those summers ago, he was real, and somewhere, buried so deep beneath darkness and rage and corrupted power that even I can barely find him anymore, he still exists. He still looks for you.